Southeast sports fans. I'm Hannah Barton, joined by Brendan Schaefer, and today we're previewing the 2025 Ole Miss Rebels. Interested to see what this Ole Miss team is going to look like because the roster looks a lot different than last season, but nonetheless, there seems to be a lot of talk of high expectations for this Ole Miss team. Brendan, what are your thoughts on kind of what people are wanting to see from this Ole Miss team despite the roster turnover?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of turnover, and anytime you're introducing a new starting quarterback to the situation, that's going to invite questions about what really the ceiling is going to be for a team like Ole Miss. Ole Miss was one of those SEC teams last year that was just on the outside looking in of the college football playoff with a 9-3 record. You know, they had every opportunity to get in, but the loss that they had to Kentucky really hurt them. I think if you're 10-2 and you're an SEC team like Ole Miss, with the wins they had on the board last year, you're probably in over a team like SMU from the ACC. So that's in the past, and now they move forward. But they do so without Jaxson Dart. You're going to have Austin Simmons as the new quarterback introduced this season to the Rebels, and of course has a pretty interesting story and background, Hannah. But more than anything on the football field, the fans here will be looking for him to kind of step into the shoes of Jaxson Dart, who was an explosive, dynamic playmaker for this offense last season, and they're going to try to find a way to replicate the production of that offense and maybe even take things a little bit further.
Yeah, we've seen in the past Ole Miss be able to kind of restock those quarterbacks, and Lane Kiffin always seemed to have a really good dynamic with his quarterback. We saw Jaxson Dart fill in when with Matt Corral, and now you're seeing Austin Simmons come in. And you mentioned Austin Simmons is his story. It is really fascinating to me. And I'm really interested to see what he will do on the football field because everything off of the football field is just something that I'm really perplexed by. So he's 19 years old, a redshirt sophomore, completed his undergrad degree, graduated high school 2 years early at 16 to join this Ole Miss team, not just the football team, but he was a pitcher on the baseball team last season as well. Now he said he is fully focusing on football, which I'm sure Ole Miss fans are very happy about as he is the new starting quarterback. But just as a young kid, only 19 years old, but like I mentioned, he's got a college degree. He's got not one but two sports seasons under his belt, two different sports seasons, excuse me, that he can kind of pull from. And I'm interested to see what he does because they lost a lot of these offensive weapons for Ole Miss. Now they have been able to restock, but
Mm-hmm.
they're going to rely a lot on this 19-year-old new guy who's never started an SEC game before.
Yeah, and so like you said, everything off the field kind of tells you like this is a guy that's more mature than his years and should be ready to step into the opportunity there down in Oxford. But as far as the weapons, I still think Ole Miss is going to end up with one of the better receiving cores in the conference. When you look at Caden Lee leading the way, Harrison Wallace and Deshaun Stribling, three guys that are expected to really make some waves, and they do. They have experience and are upperclassmen, and so we'll see what the weapons look like for him. And also, we've seen a running back, Logan Diggs, in this conference before as well, and feel like he's a guy that can lead the running game pretty effectively too. So I think Austin Simmons is going to have weapons at his disposal. Every team at this time of year, we're saying, hey, offensive line's got to be good. For all the other stuff we're saying about the skill position players to be true. But I feel like, especially with Lane Kiffin at head coach, like this is an offense that year over year is explosive, is dynamic, and is willing to kind of keep throwing even late into the fourth quarter sometimes. So you're able to kind of rack up some stats that way. I feel like Ole Miss's offense is going to be good. Until we see Austin Simmons, we don't exactly know what we're going to get from him.
Yeah, I'm anxious to see what Simmons has to show us, but also another player that I'm keeping my eye on is Caleb Odom, the Auburn transfer. Came into Auburn as a tight end, shifted over to wide receiver when he was at Auburn, and now from what we're hearing as of this time of this recording, he's kind of getting reps at both wide receiver and tight end. They've got some shoes to fill at tight end, losing some guys to the draft and to the NFL, and so I'm interested to see what they do with him because he's a versatile player that could really come into play, as you mentioned, with this pass heavy Ole Miss team that's kind of gutsy when it comes to making those plays late in the game.
Yeah, and that's going to be a big part of it because we're going to look and see what this Mississippi defense is going to look like last year after it was very strong defensively a year ago. But again, year over year, things can change. And of course, with the way their offense likes to sometimes run up tempo, likes to throw down the field, your defense might end up back on the field pretty quickly. I don't think they're going to complain about that if it's because you put 7 points on the board. But we'll be curious to see kind of the dynamic of the way the tempo flows for Ole Miss this season as well.
Yeah, you touched on that defense. They lost quite a bit of guys. Ole Miss did lose some really key parts of their roster, having the most players in program history drafted. Defense took a big hit on that one. They only have one starter from last year returning on that defensive side of the ball. But lucky for them, it's that linebacker in Perkins who finished last season with 10.5 sacks. He was ranked 10th in the FBS. So definitely someone that they're going to rely on, not just on what he can do from a defensive standpoint, but also just as a veteran and as a leader in the locker room and on that side of the ball.
Yeah, and so the defense is going to have to kind of prove itself as being able to replicate a lot of the production that it held last season. But I'm kind of interested and curious for Ole Miss fans' perspective on the way that the media predicted them to finish down at SEC Media Days. The way that the votes came out, it was Texas, Georgia at the top of the predicted standings. Alabama, you go through LSU, you go through South Carolina, you go through Florida before you get to Ole Miss down there kind of in the middle of the pack. I think the media is sort of responding to either a couple of things. One, the turnover on the roster for Ole Miss and the just the unknown of a new quarterback and just saying, well, with Florida, we kind of know DJ Lagway is there. Okay, let's bump Florida up a little bit in our preseason rankings. Okay, South Carolina, we know Lenora Sellers is there. Let's pump the South Carolina Gamecocks up in our rankings a little bit. And same thing you could say for LSU with Nussmeier. And so, like, the three teams that are right above Ole Miss that I'm not sure are actually better than Ole Miss, the reasoning for all of those, I think, is quarterback driven. And so really, does it all kind of boil down to Austin Simmons could be the answer to whether or not Ole Miss ends up sort of in that middle of the SEC, or as we kind of take a quick look at their schedule, which we will get into more in a few minutes, if they can find a way to rise to the top and be a team that contends for an SEC championship this season.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon to see these preseason polls by the media that a team that doesn't have maybe a known or veteran quarterback, maybe sitting kind of at the bottom of what we expect to be like the upper middle pack. We saw it last year. And what we've also seen is, quarterback Tick Lenora Sellers, for example, picked to be one of the worst quarterbacks in the SEC last season in terms of just not knowing what he had to now being in the Heisman conversation. And, so who knows what's going to come with Simmons. And I know Ole Miss fans are really anxious to see that happening. And, thankfully he gets to start at Georgia State, and we'll dive into that schedule, like you said, in a few minutes. But we're going to hear from Brett Norsworthy first. Kylie and I had the chance to talk to him at SEC Media Days, and he is an Ole Miss expert through and through. So it gave some really interesting insight on the expectations of this team and what he thinks they can achieve this season. So we'll go ahead and get into that.
Yes, thank you so much, Hannah. Well, like you said, we got to talk to Stats Norsworthy, who's been covering Ole Miss for a very long time. He said that who was expecting Lane Kiffin to be at SEC Media Days going into year 6. He also said that this Ole Miss defense this year is going to be one of the strongest they've ever seen and might surprise some fan bases. And another shocking thing that he mentioned was that the Grove at Ole Miss is one of the cleanest places he's ever seen on a Sunday morning. Let's hear from him.
I think the first reaction is who had Lane Kiffin being here year 6 with Ole Miss.
Yeah, that is true.
That's the story. But I see Lane Kiffin and Coach Sarkisian at Texas. There's got to be employers and fans and friends at other jobs in the past are going, why couldn't we get these guys? and we've got them. We've got Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, and I think Texas obviously has Steve Sarkisian in the wheelhouse of their career. They've been through a lot. Some of it self-inflicted. That's the best way to learn a lot of times. And they're in a groove. I thought Steve Sarkisian showed yesterday when he came out on stage to the Texas A&M fight song playing.
Yeah.
Along with Lane, they may be the two in this league that could have taken that.
Mm-hmm.
If Coach Saban in the day had come out to Rocky Top playing, the building would have got incinerated. I mean, we would be digging out of the rubble still. And Sark didn't care, Lane wouldn't care, and I think it speaks to both of them. They're comfortable in their own skin, and I know Lane is in year 6, and first time he's going to look out there since he's been at Ole Miss and not be barking at a number 2 playing quarterback wearing uniform number 2. Matt Corral did, Jaxson Dart did, and now Austin Simmons will do it with number 13.
Yeah. Touching on that quarterback game, kind of what are we going to see from the offense difference now that we have Simmons under center versus Jaxson Dart?
I don't think it'd be a lot of difference. He will be able to run just as well as Jaxson Dart did. But for Ole Miss to get back to being really effective, they've got to run the ball with running backs. Lane's first 3 years either led or were second in rushing in the SEC, and that was mostly with running back Snoop Connor, Jerry Neely, then Quinshawn Judkins. The last 2 years, we kind of relied on Dart to bail us out in kind of broken plays. Got to get back to handing it off to that tailback and getting 4 or 5 or 6 yards that way in more traditional running back game. But Austin Simmons can run it. He will be more of a pocket presence than Jaxson Dart had because he's longer. I just think left-handers look different back there in the pocket. But he's got it. He's been on campus 3 years. He's played baseball. He's been in big moments, most notably last year against Georgia after Dart got hurt on the second or third play of the game, and his ankle was the size of a canned ham. I didn't think there'd be any way he could go back in, and he got shot up and went back in. Now, with medical advice, they said, you're okay to play, but we're not making you. You have to clear everything. And they even summoned his dad down from the stands, and they talked about it. And he said, do you want to play? This is risking a lot, maybe on the back end of NFL. He said, I'm going back in. And he did. He played great. But Austin Simmons was great that day. He was great the week before in the fourth quarter in the rout at Fayetteville. Arkansas fans still mad at us for running it up. But Lane wanted to keep running the offense, so if that doomsday scenario hit, he would be ready for it. And the fourth quarter at Fayetteville got him ready the week before.
Yeah, you mentioned Lane a lot, like going into year 6, kind of going into this next year. What will fans be happy with at the end of the season?
Going to the playoffs. It's a playoff world, and he's raised that at Ole Miss. It's so fun to be around him. I wish everybody could see kind of that side of him. It's a little protected. He's a little bit still in a shell kind of out in public, not on Twitter, but kind of on that main stage. Yeah. But when it's time for business, it's business. When it's time for fun, it's fun. And he's been great to us. Best coach I've ever worked with. Straight as a pin, honest. After heartbreak last year at LSU, losing in overtime, he came over to me and I said, Coach, if you don't want to do this, we don't have to. He goes, no, you talk when you win, you talk when you lose. He said, and it's in my contract. Let's roll. And we did the interview, and he was, he gave me a lot. But I see our fans raise it. His first year, COVID year, we go 4-5, and got to the Outback Bowl, the old Outback Bowl in Tampa. And he wanted to go to that game badly because his dad, Monte Kiffin, is a legend in Tampa, in their ring of honor with the famous Tampa 2 defense, and what he accomplished with John Gruden and other head coaches there, Tony Dungy as well, but they won it all under Gruden. So he was into that game. He really wanted to win that game in front of a sparse crowd, but in front of his parents' friends. And we played well, beat Indiana, had to win it with a lot of reserves, and post-game back to the hotel because of no fans because of COVID. It wasn't very many of us back at the hotel. It's not the normal hotel scene after a big bowl win. It was just us. And I'm on cloud 9, bubbling. He goes, now, you're not satisfied with this, are you? I said, Coach, at Ole Miss, we'll take about whatever bowl we can get. He goes, I better not see any coffee table books about going 5-5 and winning the flipping Outback Bowl. He said, we got a lot bigger goals than this, and he's raised them, and we've met them. So yeah, playoffs, and why not? Just that close last year, and we did it to ourselves. Losing at home as a 16-point favorite to Kentucky, that throws it into the hands of the jury, and the jury said no, and probably should have. 9-3 was not a playoff team last year.
and he's been outspoken about, playoffs or bust kind of mentality. Same with the fan base. There has been, some roster turnover in terms of just, their most successful NFL draft and losing some really, really talented guys. But he's been able to kind of replace that talent. What has he done in the offseason to do that?
Well, he got one Umana out and another one in, got Princewell in for Prince Umana that was out. And we know you can't walk through the Grove without running through a Umana in Oxford, They just swing a towel and you hit a Umana in the Grove. But he's replaced a lot in the portal, a portal transfer in the defensive line from LSU that we couldn't block last year. I hope he's as hard to block for us as he was at LSU last year, because he was in our backfield all night. And we really missed Quinshon Judkins last year in blitz pickup. Everybody thinks we missed him in carries, and we did. But in blitz pickup, he was a wall back there. But so we've got transfers there. But also in the defensive line, we've got 3 in-state youngsters that got in traditional recruiting that they see it as being their time. They saw Walter Nolan. They saw J.J. Pegues last year. Now they think it's their time, and I think it is. Well, Pete Golding loves this defense, our defense coordinator. Linebackers may be as strong as we've had, and T.J. Daughtery was here on Monday representing Ole Miss in the defense, and he's a big-time player.
You mentioned T.J. Daughtery. Who's someone that is going to be a breakout star that's maybe unexpected, or someone that isn't talked about enough?
Probably Centarian Perkins at linebacker as well, another in-state recruit. Traditional recruiting, it's still being done. Now, after you get them, you got to keep them with the NIL and the portal world. But number 4, Centarian Perkins on defense, I think at the end of the year, people will go, that guy at Ole Miss can really play.
Lane has had a pretty interesting relationship with the portal, being able to really utilize it. What do you think the portal has done for the Ole Miss football program, both positives and negatives?
Well, it's been great, and it starts with our collective, the Grove Collective, what Walker Jones did with it. It was at the forefront of getting the collective right, and Lane embraced it. The administration, chancellor, athletics director, the entire football office embraced the portal. A lot of people were still sitting around thinking college sports is going to sober up and kind of go back to, never mind 1980, go back to 2005 world. It's not. And I'm very pro player being paid. I don't think the players of the past were necessarily used, but a lot of money was made off of them. And the coaches could leave whenever they wanted to in the middle of the night. So we were going to restrict the players. So I'm glad for the player. I want them to make as much as they can make. Now, when you hear the word guardrail around the rules, I don't think the guardrails will hold up in court. The lawyer, Tom Mars, that is famous for representing a lot of players, every time he hears guardrail, he sees lawsuit, I can win.
Absolutely.
And then Ole Miss is sitting right now at 8.5 wins, over under. Are you automatically taking the over, or what's a game that you're a little bit worried for?
I'm automatically taking the over, but I am, of course, worried about the bigger ones, the LSU at home, back-to-back road trips, back-to-back weeks to Oklahoma and Norman and Georgia and Athens. I think it's reversed, Georgia first and then Oklahoma. So that will be really challenging. But out of the gate, last year it opened against Furman. This year opened against the FBS opponent in Georgia State. Last year it was really easy until we played Kentucky. This year we play Kentucky week 2 and a lot of payback, but can't beat Kentucky bad enough to avenge that from last year.
Yeah.
I mean, could go up there and win 85-0, not going to. Those games are always close, always pretty wild at the end, was last year. But we can never beat them bad enough, because that really puts the question mark about Ole Miss in everybody's heads around college football last year. You lose at home as a 16-point favorite to Kentucky. That's just not perceived as being very good.
So if they go out there and destroy Kentucky, how do you think that momentum will carry in to the rest of the season?
Well, the very next week is Arkansas at home, and Arkansas wanting to make up for that last year got 63 on them. I think the most SEC points Arkansas's ever allowed at home, and it was easy. So get them at home. So after 3 weeks, got 2 SEC games, home and road, and then settle in Tulane the week before LSU at home. And 2 years ago, when played LSU at home, down 9 with 5 minutes to go, the comeback to win, to beat Jaden Daniels in his Heisman Trophy winning season. That really was the game that launched the Lane is serious. Lane can really do that at Ole Miss. It may not be the old Ole Miss anymore. And I tell a lot of people, and I'm going to clean it up for family viewing, we really got our stuff together at Ole Miss. And for a long time, that stuff word was another word, and we did not have our stuff together. We got it together at every level you have to have. Chancellor, AD, collective, men's basketball coach, women's basketball coach, baseball. It showed, and Keith Carter just got rewarded for it with a contract extending him to 2029. He had played basketball there. He knows it and knows it well. He's from a small town in Arkansas, and just think, a lot of times in summertime radio, we do a lot of what ifs and a lot of lists. One of the biggest what ifs ever, and Nolan Richardson almost signed Keith Carter back in the day. What if he signs him? He goes on, he's a Razorback, and we never get him at Ole Miss, but he didn't. Rob Evans did, and rest is history.
As someone that followed this team pre-Kiffin and then talking about the impact that he's had, not just for the football team, but just setting that standard in Oxford, what has it been like watching this fan base really rally behind what's being created at Ole Miss?
Well, we always had that great pregame scene. The Grove is all that. I call it the greatest place on earth. I think on game day at Ole Miss is the greatest place on earth. Augusta National second. But the Grove at Ole Miss on game day, we always had that. But often we would have that big Friday night scene. The Friday nights in Oxford are better than anything. I think that's almost better than game day. We'd have the Friday night scene. We'd have game day, pageantry in the Grove. Then we'd go get splattered. That's not very much fun.
Splattered. I've never heard that.
And we would, I took my nephew his senior year of high school, and they were playing Mizzou. And before Mizzou was in the SEC, that was what was the quarterback at Mizzou? Chase Daniel. He was quarterback at Mizzou. They had good tight ends, had a real good tailback. They ended up going, I think, to the Cotton Bowl that year and beating Arkansas. And we go down, and on Friday night, it was just electric. Restaurant, bar scene, square, perfect. Out of a movie. Game day, pregame in the Grove. Get to the game, Mizzou beats the stew out of Ole Miss. And how much fun is that? It would kind of build to a big apex and then collapse. Now it's building to a big apex and continuing all weekend. And one of the fun things, if you ever come to Oxford, you got to do it. You got to be in the Grove during the middle of it, but you got to see it on Sunday morning. I don't know how they do it, but on Sunday morning, it's like it never happened. It's spotlessly clean by 7 o'clock on Sunday morning, and where I stay on Friday nights at the inn at Ole Miss. I love to either walk over there or drive by, and it's like it never happened. And when we beat Alabama in 2014, Katy Perry there for game day and college game day there, I go over on Sunday morning and go, history made here yesterday, and you wouldn't even know it.
We're back now taking a deeper dive into this Ole Miss schedule. Sitting at an 8.5 win total right now, looking forward to this 2025 season. Brendan, what are some things that kind of stand out to you as you take a look at this schedule and take a look at some of the numbers?
Yeah, I mean, the win total is at an interesting spot. 8.5 for Ole Miss. So it's just basically, if you do what you did last year and go 9-3, you're going to be able to clear that number. And it's a pretty even odds as far as it's concerned. -118, I'm seeing from one sports book on over, and it would be -104 on under. So pretty close to even odds when it comes to 8.5 being like the true projection for where we think Ole Miss lands. Now, when you take a look at the schedule, it's manageable. It really is. Like you look at this one, you have to go to Georgia, and that's obviously probably the marquee game that stands out as being the most difficult. And you have to host LSU. You have to host a Florida team that hasn't performed as well in recent years. But if Lagway is healthy, they could take a step forward under Billy Napier this season. But you get to host that game. You get to host South Carolina. That'll be a really interesting matchup of kind of last year's breakout start, the quarterback position with Lenora Sellers against what Ole Miss fans are hoping will be this year's SEC breakout at QB in Austin Simmons. Like, all right, we're talking about a lot of teams that are, tough, capable teams in that kind of upper middle quadrant like you talked about. But at the same time, you'll notice some absences on this schedule for Ole Miss. I'm looking around, don't see Alabama anywhere. I don't see Texas anywhere. Like there's manageable aspects to this thing, Hannah, when you realize, tough games that I think are maybe more coin flip or maybe more of them that you lean Ole Miss on, but not many of those that you look at and say, oh, there's just no way, right? You're going to go to Georgia and put your best foot forward. Georgia's going to be favored in that game, I think, reasonably. It doesn't mean Ole Miss can't win it, but you don't have a lot of those on your schedule this year if you're the Rebels, which could be favorable if you're trying to think about not only clearing that 8.5 win total, but maybe going even a little bit beyond that and trying to get into the college football playoff with a potential 10-2 record.
What stands out to me looking at this schedule is you see those 4 blocks of red, those 4 home games, Arkansas, Tulane, LSU, Washington State, and only one of those really being a big test in that LSU game. But again, they get to host LSU. If I'm looking at LSU on my schedule, an SEC team, and I'm looking at getting to host it instead of having to go play in Baton Rouge, I mean, automatically my confidence is shooting up a few pegs because no one wants to go play in Baton Rouge, especially at night or in any sense. But I think that having Arkansas and Tulane, Washington State surrounding those games is going to be really helpful for them. And then going to Georgia, like we said, is going to be a game that I think, depending on the outcome of the LSU game, could be a make or break game in terms of getting a win at Georgia. I think could be the biggest momentum shift for Ole Miss if they're able to start that first half of their schedule, maybe with just one loss to LSU.
Yeah, I think that Ole Miss sets up really favorably this year because the road game, you always look at the road games and say how manageable or difficult is the road portion of our schedule. And for Mississippi, you get the benefit in a way of having the Egg Bowl be a team that just doesn't have very many expectations this year. It's Mississippi State, and that does count as one of your road games. And so you can kind of, again, we always say with rivalry games, you got to be careful. You can't assume the sale, but I'm taking Ole Miss when it comes to that rivalry game, especially knowing it's the last game of the season and what could be on the line for them to just clean up a potential college football playoff resume by that point. You go to Kentucky. Look, they're not going to have it happen 2 years in a row. I know that it happened at home last year. Ole Miss, you lost to Kentucky. Their fans know it well enough. I don't have to belabor the point. It cost them the college football playoff. They're not going to lose to Kentucky this year. I don't care where that game is played. I've got Ole Miss, and I've got them by a lot. So that tells you, all right, you roll through Georgia State, you roll through Kentucky. You got to handle Arkansas at home. I'm not going to look over Arkansas and say they can't rise up their rank compared to last year with Taylon Green still there at quarterback. But you win that game if you are the Rebels and you beat Tulane. Okay, you've got that 4-0 record going into the LSU game. That should be momentum. That should be, look, I think Ole Miss is probably favored in that game when they're at home. I know that the LSU Tigers might have the quarterback advantage on paper, but you mentioned it. Why can't Austin Simmons make a Lenore Sellers type leap for Ole Miss this year? I would lean Ole Miss to actually win that game right now. I'm not going to say that it's a certainty, but I'd lean in that direction, which means clean up Washington State, and you're 6-0 going into Athens, Georgia, which, yeah, it would be a turning point for their season in that if you can clean up Georgia at that point, not only are you looking like a playoff lock, but you're talking about a national championship legitimate contender if you're Ole Miss at that point in the season. That being said, I'm probably going to lean Georgia on the road, but it's not a game that you need if you're thinking about sneaking into the college football playoff. Oklahoma with John Mateer at quarterback on October the 25th on the road is not going to be an easy task. But look, Ole Miss was the better team last year. I think Oklahoma is going to be mired in a stretch where they have a very difficult schedule, and so they may not have those aspirations at that time if they've been beaten down a bit by their schedule. Ole Miss could take advantage of that. I think the South Carolina game is the one I circle. I think they're two pretty evenly matched teams on November 1st. It is a home game, and the winner of that very well may go to the college football playoff. I like Ole Miss to go over 8.5 this year because I found them to be favorable in the majority of the games that we talked about. And you've got Citadel and Mississippi State toward the end of the season, and you get to host Florida. So, I really, really feel comfortable with saying this is a team that with this schedule can go 9-3, Hannah. Beyond that, it's going to be up to them if they can clean up some of the really tough games on their schedule in order to make a push for the playoff.
And again, with this Ole Miss team, because the roster is looking so different, I think we're going to know probably by the time that Arkansas game wraps up what this Ole Miss team is really going to be able to handle and achieve this season. I think, like you said, Kentucky away, it's pretty much a done deal. But Arkansas is one that you just don't know, and so I think that's going to be kind of their test. And then Tulane isn't one where they can completely let their foot off the gas. I mean, Tulane has been a team that is capable of playing well in the past couple of years, but I definitely think by the time you get to the Arkansas game, we're going to know what kind of Ole Miss team we're dealing with.
Well, I mean, Arkansas is pretty early in the schedule, though. So you're going to have that. And then LSU, I think, is really probably the big one where those are two teams that in our heads we're kind of like, all right, they're in that upper middle, but which one of them can emerge? It's probably going to be the LSU and the South Carolina game, because I would say that all three of those teams, and maybe you could even throw Florida into that conversation, are like, I'm just thinking in the mental terms, because again, we always have our interpretation of the SEC going into the year. And then as weeks go along, we go, oh, wait, they're better than I thought. Oh, wait, they aren't who we thought they were. And so you kind of figure it out. I think from that quadrant, the fact that LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida are games that are on the schedule for this Ole Miss Rebels team, in South Carolina as well. That 3-pack of games, 4 teams, if you can separate yourself as the best from that group of teams and perhaps go 2-1 in those games, maybe even sweep them, the Ole Miss team that does that is going to the college football playoff. So I'm in on over 8.5 for their win total. Want to check out their playoff odds here as well, because I think it doesn't take much of a leap to think that with their schedule they might be able to get there. This is basically like, if you're Lane Kiffin, you gotta just like 2-putt. You just gotta find a way to get this thing across the finish line, because the schedule sets up for about as favorable as it could be for Ole Miss in recent years to make a playoff push. Plus 175 is all we're getting at DraftKings Sportsbook if we say yes, Ole Miss can make the playoff. I think I'd like them a little bit more in that plus 200 to plus 250 range. But look, there's a reason probably the sports books are looking at what we're looking and saying, hey, this is a manageable schedule. If Austin Simmons is the guy and you don't have a drop off from what Jaxson Dart gave you, yeah, this is a legitimate chance that Ole Miss makes a college football playoff, because you don't have to face the Tennessees or the Alabamas or the Texases that there will be 4 or 5, maybe even 6 teams from the SEC that have a push to be in that top 12. But Ole Miss can kind of do its own thing in its own lane over here. It has to take care of the Floridas, the Ole Misses, those types of teams. Ole Miss has to take care of the Floridas, the South Carolinas, and the LSUs. That's the way that Ole Miss can find its way into the playoff without even ever really having to tangle with teams that are considered the top in the conference, like a Texas. Yeah, you play Georgia. You don't have to beat Georgia to make the playoff this year.
Yeah, if I'm an Ole Miss fan, I'm looking at what's Lane Kiffin going to do with this new quarterback, because he's proven success rates in the past in terms of being able to take his new guys and turn them into people that have led the program. But how long is it going to take? Is it going to be this year, or is it going to take a couple seasons to be able to get Simmons to where this Ole Miss team needs him to be? But as we've mentioned, talking about him, he doesn't seem to have any problem being an early bloomer, getting ahead of the game and showing that maturity. So I'm sure Ole Miss fans are really anxious to see what comes from this young new quarterback, as am I. We're going to continue to follow Ole Miss, obviously, throughout the season, see where they end up as one of those upper quadrant teams for the SEC. But that's about how it wraps up for Ole Miss. Anything else you wanted to add, Brendan?
Yeah, just final thought. At SEC Media Days, I did rank Ole Miss 5th on my ballot, and I think there will be 5 college football playoff teams at least from this league. So I guess that means I do find Ole Miss to be a team that'll get that 10th win. Will find a way to get enough against those similarly minded teams in the schedule to be able to get it done. And look, they can do that without beating Georgia. But if they beat Georgia, yeah, you're talking about a team that just has to 2-putt it in down the rest of the schedule to find a way to 10-2. I think that's the magic number for Ole Miss this year.
Well, we'll see not too much longer until we get to find out what Ole Miss is going to look like this season, what that quarterback is going to look like, and where they fall in the SEC. But that does it for our 2025 preview of Ole Miss. Thanks, guys.